showed you.
Yes. I saw some little, yeah, I won't go there.
We know you and love you. So to begin with, I'm Shari Hopper, and I'm going to introduce first to speak Carol Boyd. She was married to Douglas Boyd, who was our partner in the beginnings of Orient Flume. And she wants to talk about the early days before even we got together. So here's Carol.
Thank you, Shari. One thing I want to make sure is that you can hear me. Anytime that I go to a talk and we don't know how to use the mic, can you hear me way back there?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Well, this is really going to be the early days. This is almost, pre-written language, you might say, because and it goes back as far, I know this seems really a long time ago, but 1949. This is when I was going to Pine Street School and Douglas Boyd was going to Pine Street School, which was an elementary school. We continued on to junior high in the same large class. And then he went to Enterprise, which had just opened over the river. I went to Shasta.
What town was this?
High school in Redding, California.
Redding.
Yeah. And we actually didn't meet again until I went to Shasta College and he came to Shasta College a year later. We normally would have graduated at the same time, but his father, I found out, was, because I didn't know that in elementary school, was the head of the art department at Shasta College, and he had been given a sabbatical to go teach at the Maidstone Art School in Kent, England. And so Douglas missed his whole senior year, so he was behind, but we met again in Shasta College. And I was in art, in painting and art history. He was in ceramics, because touring England and going to cathedrals and museums, he became very interested in ceramics, although he had done a lot of photography, and I think he thought that was the direction he was going to go in. So then we both got our associate art degree, and my parents had moved to Chico, so I was going to Chico State, and I found out after he had graduated from Shasta College that he was going to go to his father's alma mater, which is in Eugene, Oregon, the University of Oregon. He had it made. His grandmother had a boarding house, which was now surrounded by the college. He had wonderful food. His grandmother loved him. And so he was going there. I was going to Chico State. And then one day when he came down for a visit, I made this exclamation, which was very spontaneous, and I said, I'm going to go to San Jose State. I don't know exactly where that came from, except someone had said, I'm going to go to San Jose State. And I think the reason I wanted to go to San Jose State was that popular song was, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? And I also know that song that Barbara Streisand sang, Any place I hang my hat is home. I thought, oh, that's me, I was, However, that was just talk. And then surprisingly enough, Douglas said, well, have you seen the campus? And I said, no. He said, well, how would you like to go? I said, well, yes. Knowing that I wasn't going to go to San Jose State. So we did drive down one day and went to the art department, obviously, and walked up and down the hallway downstairs and went upstairs and was getting ready to leave when we turned the corner, and one of the doors was open and there was a loud noise coming out there. So of course, very curious, he opened the door more and we walked in, and in the middle of the room was this huge, it looked like a big refrigerator made out of cement. There was a hole and there was flames coming out of it. And then a man came around the corner with a blowpipe, and he knew it was a glass blowing furnace, and they had a department of glass which had been set up recently. So he quickly turned around, grabbed my hand, and off we went to the admissions office. And knowing that he had 2 weeks, he was going to Eugene, he walked in and he said, I need to enroll in San Jose State. And they looked at him and said, too late. And he was shocked, because I know that when he saw the glass blowing, doing ceramics is a process that takes a long time, but the instantaneousness of glass blowing and the glory and the beauty of the glass was, beyond comprehension, and that's what he realized at that moment that he really wanted to do. When, at the same time, another registrar came up and said to the gal, hey, ask him if he plays an instrument. We need more instruments in the band. And Douglas actually did. He played the clarinet and the recorder, and he said, oh yeah, I play. So they enrolled him. Needless to say, the only thing he ever blew was out of a blowpipe. He never joined the band. I don't know if they knew that that's what he was going to do, but I'm sure they were hopeful that he was going to be in the band. So he came to San Jose State, and then I think that was 1965, and we got married in December of '65. I finished my schooling at Chico State and went to San Jose State in '66, and I believe it was either '67 or so. Douglas came back from class. He said, "Hey," he said, "I just met the neatest guy." He said, "I want him to come over," and that was David Hopper. And so at that point, Shari and David became friends, and we did a lot of things together. One of the things that David actually influenced Douglas to do is when there was a glassblower that had come from Germany. Was it Erwin Eich? Who was the glassblower from Germany? Yeah. He said, I think it'd be nice, knowing that you know photography, let's make a chronology of his visit here and his glassblowing, and then when he leaves, we'll give it to him. And so our bathtub and our kitchen sink, which is very tiny, became a dark room. And I know you probably remember, but you did some wonderful photos together. And without him instigating, I don't think it would ever have happened. So at that point, Douglas got his master's degree in ceramic and glass in, I think, '69. And I think, David, you did the next, or '68, yeah. And actually that's sort of what facilitated a little bit of this conversation, although we had been asked and been talking about giving a history of Orient Flume. But I found Douglas's ceramic piece that he made for his committee for his master's degree in the basement, and I thought it really needs to be shown. I need to take it to some museum or somewhere. And I thought, well, maybe Reading, but he never blew glass in Reading. I thought, no, it needs to be Chico. So I brought it over and gave it to Randy, and then within 2 weeks they set up the show, which was just it's beautiful, wonderful. What's interesting is on his master's piece, which is ceramic and glass, a globe of glass, and then a circle of glass that holds the dome, he said, new directions in glass blowing. And I think he thought it was going to be modern. He didn't realize that shortly down the road he'd be doing vases and paperweights and other beautiful glass. So at that point, when he graduated, he sent out about 30 resumes across the United States trying to find a university or college that wanted to open a glass blowing studio. And I believe we got one answer back, and it was from DeKalb, Illinois, or NIU, which is Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. So we did take the position. The head of the art department said he wanted to have the finest, art studio in the country with every discipline. And I believe I asked him if he had finger painting, but he didn't answer that one. But so he was hired, and the one caveat was that he could not be blowing when he first started because they were moving into a brand new facility, but he would get the ceramic department when it was empty. So when we got there in 69, I think it was fall of 69, he said, you'll have to wait because they're not quite moved out. So he taught ceramics for those 2 semesters. And that summer, which would have been 70, I believe, we came back to California and went up to Redding where his father and mother lived, and he took a job at night school during the summer and taught photography. And while we were there, there was a letter that came from the art department in DeKalb, said, I really have sad news for you. He said, you're not going to have the room when you come back. It has been allocated to another department that just opened up. So I don't know when I can get you a place to start a glass blowing studio. You'll be doing the ceramics. And then it turns out, and you won't be surprised if you wanted to guess what newly formed department that was. I can spell it for you, COMPT, Computer Department, 1970. So I think I'm more verbal, and I looked at Douglas and I said, you know, if you ever want to blow glass, now's your time to leave, because you're going to be here for a while. And I said, I would rather starve in California, you know, if that's the case. So at the same time, Douglas and David were in communication, and David had graduated, and you can correct me, but he built a small glass studio and was blowing glass. And he said, well, if you come out, you know, he said, it's going to be, soon we're going to have the Hall of Flower show where the San Francisco Ceramic Organization will be having their Christmas sale, and we could do a lot of glass blowing together. And he said, I would really like to make a lot of money, because he, I believe, wanted to travel to Europe and visit a few glass blowing. You can tell him that, you can correct some of that, but I love my story. So they did that, and one of the things that I believe you instigated was that you wanted the glass to be set up in plexiglass, white plexiglass shelving, so that it was totally away from organic. And I remember, I don't know if we have photo, it was beautiful, and it was such a success that we made quite a lot of money. But then I don't want to say it was 20 million, but it was something like that, no. Anyway, if I'm right, David left and went somewhere, or stayed blowing glass.
Well, I'll talk about that.
Yeah, good. I didn't want to read anything in any of the magazines that I read, because I just thought, just tell what you remember. It doesn't mean it's right. So, we went back so we came down there, and we got to stay in the same place we did, in a smaller version where we were for 3 months. And then we came back to Chico and lived with my parents. When, not too long after that, a house down the street came up for sale. It was an estate, and we bid on it and got it. And so that was where we were going to open a small, you know, craft glass blowing studio. And so we had a huge gas meter come in that it's just almost the size of this. They're not putting those in anymore, but anyway, he didn't get to start on it until David got back from either Cupertino or wherever he was, and Shari and David moved up and briefly lived in our house until they found a place across the street, and could even look down on the glass blowing facility. So a pad was poured out of concrete, because they didn't put the furnace inside the carriage house, which was all wood. And we were fortunate enough, when we went to take some debris from the carriage house to the dump, somebody had just dumped clods of bamboo. Well, being really naive about bamboo, we took it. And I never realized that some bamboo has runners, and there's no way, once you have those, that you can get them out of, anywhere. It was not that kind at all. It has been in the same place for over 50 years. So we were lucky with that one.
I think I can take over now.
Yeah, anyway, the other thing, you hear that. The other thing that was interesting is at that point when they got the glass blowing studio together, I just recently heard that David had got some parts from a building next to us that did ice, kept ice frozen to be delivered. Do you remember that? I never knew that story, but I thought it was very interesting. Anyway, together with all the parts, they had to have a layer, which is, a hot oven that anneals the glass, and then they needed a wheel to grind the bottom of the glass, and they put it together. And with that, we started having productions of glass. And one of the ways that they were getting glass at this time, and if I'll have Shari hold this a second, I have to pull something up. David will remember this, and Shari will too.
I think we have a little bit different memories.
From Corning, New York? Was
No,
that it?
from Blinko.
Blinko. So they would get barrels of these paperweights or items, and this was one that was not too bad, but it is so heavy. It must have taken so long to melt these. They what? You broke them?
We broke them up.
Good. And then I think shortly after that, you started mixing the batch with silk. I don't remember that. All of this can be clarified after I give Hayden that. So it was interesting. Oh. We ended up obviously having all this glass and needed to sell it, so we started doing some of the craft fairs. So there was the Renaissance Fair in Nevada, and there was one in LA, which is David and Shari did because he had an aunt and uncle and relatives down there. I don't know if we did it more than once. You also.
I'm going to tell all about
good.
that, Carol.
Oh, well, that's good. So, but that is getting us. We haven't got to Park Avenue yet. Anyway, I was going to say that. Now I lost my train of thought. When I do have to say that when they were in Palos Verde, they met someone that was a wholesaler and thought the glass was good and would be interested in selling it, and came up to Chico and said, yeah, your facility is great for a hobby, but it will never fill your orders that I will have for you, because he had 5 showrooms. And he also mentioned that he had one of his sellers in Texas spend the day in the library to look up the Orient Flume glass name, which he thought, the buyer thought was probably, established during the gold rush. But I'm jumping ahead. The way that Orient Flume came across as a name is that they were trying to decide a name for the glass. They didn't want, they had Boyd and Hopper, and
No, they had B&B, Boyd and Ballantyne.
I knew they had Boyd and Ballantyne, but I didn't know if I wanted to mention that. So anyway, they didn't know which way they wanted to go, and we did go down to the city one time in our bell bottoms and went into Gumps, and we also went into Taylor & Ing, which I wasn't familiar with. And when I walked out, I thought, that's a really nice name, Taylor & Ing. I loved the design of the NG. It reminded me of the tapestry that was made during the Art Nouveau period, and it had a movement to it. And I thought, well, I don't think we're going to be able to have anything like that. Well, I live on 3rd Street. My mother lives on 3rd Street. I never checked the cross streets, but when I went up to her house, I saw that it was Orient. And then I thought, what was the other one on the other side? So I ran down, and it was Flume. And I thought, that's a really nice name, and it's historical to Chico, which I thought was wonderful. So we discussed it, and that's how that name came across. But when Guston came up, the wholesaler, he asked me if I knew what it meant. And I said, well, I believe other than there were a number of established Chinese neighborhoods, I said flume was, had something to do with bringing logs down. He said, well, you might look it up in the dictionary. So I did, and it said that it meant a pearl of great beauty and luster, and anything today that's beautiful and valuable. And the word flume is French, or Old French, to flow and to bring movement. So the name seemed ideal for Orient Flume. And I know that if I had not made the comment about going to San Jose and Douglas had not gone down there, he would have gone up to Eugene and done clay and pottery and probably never blown glass. But there would have always been a glass blowing studio in Chico. There's 2 or 3 now anyway. But it's an interesting story. And then at the point that they ended up moving down to Park Avenue, I went off to do cosmetology, and Shari and David and Douglas managed the company. And I think that's about all there is to say.
Thank you, Carol.
I didn't have any, there wasn't any photos, but this is an art piece which actually shows all the type of glass vases, paperweights, and the little animals that were there, done by a graduate student from Chico State.
Thank you. Okay, so this slide is showing David's MA show, 1968. He was the first one to get an MA in glass in the United States. And it was all due to his having a teacher that was one of the first teachers to start a glass program in a university. And this was a piece that he did for a show he had in San Francisco at the William Sawyer Gallery. After he finished his MA, he started showing in that gallery. And he did mirroring, which was never been done before, and it was real experimental. And the next slide. This was his teacher in the plaid shirt, Dr. Fritz. And then, as Carol said, Irwin Eisch came to visit, and that's him on the other side with the beard. And when Irwin came, he told us, he showed us a lot of things. He brought one of his helpers with him, and he told us if we ever wanted to come to Europe, we should come and visit him. So that's what we did. David and I took off for Europe. But first we made glass at the LA County Fair. And that was a fun story because David had a studio in San Jose in an orchard off of Bascom Avenue, and he blew glass there to take down to the LA County Fair so we would have things to sell, because you can't make them that fast and you have to cool them overnight, and so it wasn't easy to accumulate pieces there that we could sell, so we wanted to be prepared. So we took all the money we made from that and went to Europe for a year. That's where we studied glass blowing at every factory we could find. And we mistakenly thought that every big tall chimney was a glass factory. So we would go to every place that had a chimney. Some of them did. But we learned a lot there, and we brought back the techniques that they were doing over there of working in teams rather than with a single individual artist. And we did the name Orient Flume also because we didn't want the studio to be named after the people's names. We wanted the people that worked for us to feel that it was their place too, and that they weren't working for the glory of somebody else's name of the studio. So this is Doug building a furnace in the backyard. on 3rd Street, where we had our first studio in the carriage house. And then we started doing fairs, and this is some of our display at the Renaissance Fair. There were several different fairs happening. There was the Dickens Fair also, and our glass was mostly like this. It wasn't iridescent at first at all. We didn't have the ability to make the iridescent luster glass. And so these are more from the Renaissance Fair. So then when we moved to the By-Right Steel Company, this is what it looked like at that time. David and I had gone to a craft fair in Palos Verdes, and we were sitting there with our glass. It was a 2-day fair, and this lady came by and she looked at it and she was interested, and David's sitting there reading a book, not paying any attention to her, and she says, "Do you mind if I bring my husband by?" And we're like, "What?" David says, "You can bring your grandma, I don't care, you know, bring anybody." So the next day she brought her husband by, and they were very interested in the glass, and she worked at the LA County Museum. And she thought, well, she could take some pieces there and see how they sell. And that was what determined whether they were going to take us on as clients. So at that point we knew we needed more space, so we started looking and we found the By-Right Steel building, and the sign there was made for us by Keith Kuykendall, and then David made the gates, and this door was made by Feather River Wooden Glass, Dan Evers and Wally Zampa. And then we continued making this kind of glass for a while, and then David and I went to New York to Corning Glass Museum, and he was in the library and he found a book of Tiffany recipes. Frederick Carter's recipes for Steuben, sorry, not Tiffany, Steuben. And he spent a whole day copying them down in a notebook. And for a week he was there copying these recipes, and then the last day he was almost finished and a librarian came over and said, "What are you doing? Where'd you get that book? That book's not supposed to be here." It was supposed to be in some, you know, private facility somewhere else, and somebody had left it there, and so we were really lucky that we got all those recipes. And then at that point we stopped using Blinko, and this is a picture of the showroom in New York. NS Gust & Company took us on, and they had 5 showrooms, Portland and Chicago and Denver and Dallas and New York. And they would buy all the samples, so that was a really big deal for us to sell a huge amount of glass for all these different showrooms. And this was what the crew looked like at that time. It was kind of like the Renaissance feeling, you know. And at that time we also, a funny story is, maybe some of you historians would remember, is that there was a bowling alley downtown by Mom's Restaurant right in there, and it closed and they dismantled it all, and a piece of the bowling alley flooring was taken by Dan Evers and brought down to our shop, and we set it up on sawhorses, and we used the paperweights to play shuffleboard. Didn't do them any good, but it was fun. Yeah, and then Dan had to move because a wood business next to a hot glass business was not a good idea for the insurance. So this is what the shop looked like at that time. We had 3 benches and 3 glory holes. And you can see Bruce Sillers here in the foreground. and Doug at the second glory hole. And we worked in teams, and there was one guy who was the server, and he would bring what we called bits, little gathers of glass from the furnace to the guy at the bench to do the decorating. And David also developed this cooling system. All this piping at the top over the area brought cool air down onto the glass blowers because it's so hot in Chico for glass blowing. Yeah, so we had a friendship because of going to all of the Glass Art Society conferences since the very beginning years of it. 73, with Marvin Lepovsky, who was the glass teacher down in Berkeley and in Oakland. And he would bring artists in, and so then we would have him bring them up to Orient Flume to teach us different things. And the guy in the behind the glass blowing benches in the dark with the beard is Johnny Toso from Italy, and he was one of the artists that Marvin brought up to teach us. So this is him talking to all of us in the studio, and then he showed us using a torch, because he was also a lamp worker, a flame worker. So that was really interesting. So we learned a lot of different technologies from these artists. And this is another one, that's Marvin on the right, and Ann Worf from Sweden. She worked at Costa Boda, and she came and showed us how to do acid etching. And so we were all very interested to learn about that. She's got the hot wax in that pot there, and she paints the glass with hot wax to make a resist, and then dip it in acid. And she brought with her Willie Anderson, and he later worked with people in China and developed, I think, some of the knockoffs of Gallet glass. So we started batching because we wanted a better quality clear glass, and it was kind of necessary for the next step of making the iridescent glass. And Doug reformulated the formulas that David brought back from Corning, and we were able to make up to 7 colors that were all compatible, which means they all could be put on one piece of glass. They were all the same coefficient of expansion, and so they wouldn't crack. And we made all our own equipment. So this is a pipe warmer, and this is a pipe cooler. The pipe can get really hot when you're working it in the furnace and the glory holes. And this is Dave Smallhouse. We had several people we hired that were students from Chico State, and they had worked with Fred Lucero at the glass department over there. And several of them went on to have their own studios afterwards, like Rick Gibbons, who became Satava, and Dave Smallhouse. And this is Scott Byers. And this is some of Scott's paperweights. And this is Joe Morell. And he went on to have a studio in Benicia, and then he moved, called Zelique, and then he moved back east and became a teacher. Well, he taught in Fresno first, and then he moved back east to be near his kids. So this shows you some of the techniques. We used this pick to pull on the glass when it was just the right consistency and temperature. And then David developed this technique of having a plate. He carved it. It's a brass plate. And he wanted to make petroglyph paperweights. And so he would put powdered glass in the depressions, and then you roll the glass, the hot glass across it, and it picks up the powders and leaves that impression on the paperweights. And later, Satava glass used this technique. And Lundberg also. Chris Bazzini, it's kind of funny, there's itinerant glassworker stories in history, and like Murano in Venice had a law that nobody could leave the island because they didn't want the secrets to escape about their glass blowing. So we had a similar thing kind of, but Chris Bazzini went to work for Lundberg Glass Studio. So he brought techniques from us down there, like using the powders and the plate, and they developed this paperweight, which is a world weight. And then we had an engraver that worked for us. Lubemeyer Richter from Steuben, and he made this crystal world weight you can take a look at later, and it's all engraved. And then when Chris came back from Lundberg Studios, he brought back the technology of using a torch to heat fine glass rods and paint with them onto the glass with a torch. And so this is Lee Huden using the torch making a critter. But before that, we didn't have the torch. This is one of Lee's pieces where he actually did sandblasting on the top of the paperweight. And there's Dave Smallhouse making a frog, his signature thing on a paperweight. And Dale Phelps using a torch. And Bruce making the antennae on the butterfly by using a really fine stringer of glass and the torch. And then this is another piece of equipment that is called a fuming chamber, and you introduce solutions into the chamber with the hot glass in there, and it creates the iridescence. So it depends on whether you want the blue iridescence or the gold iridescence. And you want to say something about iridescence, David?
No.
So also one of the things was making a nice punty. And David had a prunt he would press into the top of the glass on the punty rod, which is on the left, and it would then only attach in 4 little points. And so it was easier to take it off, or you could use a knife to break it off of the bottom of the piece. So this is Bruce with one of our signature pieces, a Jack in the Pulpit. So then you can see he's knocking the punty off of the vase and getting ready to put it into the annealing oven to cool overnight. And that's John DeWitt on the right. And John DeWitt went on to have a studio up off of on Whidbey Island off of Seattle. And he's still blowing glass today. And this is Joe knocking a paperweight off. And then this is taking the paperweights out the next day out of the annealing. So this is the cold working department. And it was pretty sophisticated for the time. We had all these different lapping wheels, different grits like you do with sanding. And you start with the coarse and you work up to the fine. And this is actually Linda Wanarina. She worked for us. You might know her from the Roost restaurant.
When she was 16.
This is when she was 16. And this is what the bottom of the paperweights looked like before they were ground and polished. And another, we had mostly women that worked in the cold working department. And then we tried this technique, which would eliminate a lot of handwork, of putting rubber bands around the paperweights, and this was a vibrating lap machine, so they would vibrate on there with a grit that would do the grinding on the bottoms. David was always coming up with innovations. And one of the things he suggested was that we had a lot of rejects, and he said, well, we should be able to utilize those. And what if we take pieces off the sides of the paperweights and use them to make something. So we hired a jeweler, Mark Stinson, and that's how we started making the jewelry. So there's some of the slabs off of the paperweights. And then we also used vases eventually. So then sheet glass was another concept David had. So we had this guy we met, Bob Totosian, and David was doing some really small little sheets, but Bob had this machine that he developed for making sheets, and they had a stained glass company. And so we also hired Dion Myers, who was blowing glass down at, what's it called? Palomar, down near San Luis Obispo area.
Actually, we stole them from Bullseye.
Oh, David says he was working at Bullseye when we stole him.
And the owner of Bullseye thanked me forever.
Yeah, Bullseye was glad. Anyway, this is the sheet rolling machine, and you would ladle the glass in the top there, and there were rollers, and the first one David made, he got the rollers actually when the Enterprise Record went out of business.
Changed technology.
Well, they changed the technology. They didn't go out of business, but they didn't use their rollers anymore, the lead rollers. So this was the crew at that time when we had the sheet glass factory. And Bullseye was making sheet glass at the same time, and you know, it was a lot of diversion from our other glass making, so we eventually stopped with the sheet glass. But meanwhile, we started a whole nother department, which was making glass boxes and butterflies, and it was more based on using stained glass and also the scraps from the vases and paperweights. So these are vase scraps that they would grind and shape and make the butterflies out of. And this one is sandblasted also. So that was Dan Boone's idea, and also Steve Addy. And both of them, unfortunately, had very sad demise. One day, Steve Addy was a pilot, and he liked to do acrobatics. And he was going to fly, so he asked David if he wanted to come along. And David declined. He was busy, you know, had other things to do, so he didn't go. And he asked Mark Stinson, our jeweler, and he didn't go. So Steve Addy went, and he was flying over his family's ranch out here in the foothills, and decided to do a maneuver and crashed and died. So David might have been in that plane. Thank heavens. This is Valerie Surjan. She worked for us in the stained glass department also, and she went on to have her own studio and is in Sacramento. And she did sandblasting on glass, and there was another lady around the same time, Mary Alice Hawks, maybe you've heard of her. She was local also, and they both would get vases and sandblast designs on them. And then we also made what we called stampies. And David got a lot of molds and made a lot of molds. And this one is a scarab. And Mark Stinson also put it into silver boxes. But I brought a few examples. This is another one we made that's actually the face off of a silver dollar. It's a coin image. And we made also, there's a rabbit over there, a pressed glass rabbit. So this is the order room, and N.S. Gustin provided us with these orders. All these forms came by fax from LA. Their main showroom was in LA. and they lived in Beverly Hills. And their technique of selling glass was to have a cocktail party and invite all of the famous people from Gump's and Neiman Marcus and all these famous stores for dinner and cocktails, and they would chat over, well, what's new, Jay? What should we buy, you know? And so that was the best way to sell. And then these would be the pieces that I would select from. So I pretty much did everything at the shop except blow glass. I did the bookkeeping, and I picked out all the orders. I told the guys what they needed to make to fill the orders. And then I also ran the showroom. I went to gift shows and bought things to sell in the shop. And then we also did use a wet belt sander. And this is the cork wheel. David bought some used equipment from a beveling company down in the Bay Area. And we developed different ways to polish the bottom of the glass, because the antique glass was all beautifully polished on the bottom with hollow grinding, and we wanted to be on that level. So this is the first steps of grinding, and this is the hollow grinding, and it had to be also all different steps with different grits to make it finely polished. And this is Cindy working on a vase. And stone wheels on a lathe, and then the cork wheel. And then signing the glass to me was really important, because I wanted the signature to be legible. I wanted you to know what it said. Most glass, you look on the bottom and you can't tell what it says. So that was really, using this tool was really good for that. This is a dental tool. It's a pneumatic. Just some examples of a few of the pieces. This was a really unusually beautiful one. And then David would go to West Virginia and get molds, steel molds from companies. There was tons of molds in places back there that were closing. And so he would find specialized molds like this seashell, and there was one that made a Greek key pattern around the vase. And then we developed all these beautiful geometric designs. And there I'm looking at them for inspecting to see if there's any flaws. This one we called King Tut. And this was an early one, wasn't all iridescent. And then the frog, that's so cute. And then this is a miniature. I have one little one up here that's the size to show you a mini. We had a mini and a magnum also, which was oversized. And this was a real specialized one. We did a limited edition. And Bruce did a lot of those limited edition pieces. This is signing a paperweight. And then because of Guston and their professionalism, they wanted us to have all this packaging and make it look really fancy. So we had stickers and little bags and cards where we wrote the registration number. We registered every piece with a number, and we put it in this ledger book, so we could keep track of where all the pieces went. And we had the philosophy that I would pick a selection. The people didn't order a specific piece. They had to have faith that we would pick a good group of pieces and that they would be able to sell them. And if ever they felt like they weren't selling, we would take them back. And that very rarely happened.
And we'd ship them to somebody else.
And then we just send them to somebody else. So another thing was packaging, and I was really into the organic stuff. I didn't want to have styrofoam and all that, so we used shredded paper, which is really a good material for packing glass. And this is one by Ed Alexander. He was one of our most talented glass artists, and he was part Indian, and he started getting involved in his roots and decided to change his name to Ed Sierra, sea and air. And he bought himself a rifle and a pawn shop, and he went to practice with it, and it ricocheted and blinded him in one eye. But he relearned everything and could still do his work eventually. And then one of the things we did was annual Easter egg hunt, where we would hide the paperweights in Annie's Glen, and for $5 you could buy a ticket and find a paperweight, and you were guaranteed to find one. And so we did them for a charity. So the first year we did it for benefit of the Stansberry House, and we did one for the Chico History Museum for the Chinese display. Wow. I tried to do one for the covered bridge, but they didn't think it was interesting. So people would line up and then we'd let them in, you know, it was like a free-for-all. And if they didn't find one, we'd have to kind of go out and help them. So one of the things we did was we wanted to have a really nice showroom, and David was from Paso Robles, and when we were in Paso Robles there was a jewelry store there that had all this beautiful furniture and a huge safe. And we would talk to the guy, he was going to go out of business, and so we wanted to buy the furniture. And he said, well, you know, I have all this jewelry and I need to keep it in this safe. And it was just to us junk jewelry, you know, it wasn't valuable at all. And we said, well, how much do you want for the jewelry? And it was a ridiculously low amount, so we just said, well, buy it all. So we brought the furniture up from Paso Robles, and Wayne Cook at that time was a trucker. And
Was a what?
Trucker. He trucked stuff.
He bucked hay and he had...
Well, he was a hay bucker, but he had a truck, and he used it to haul stuff.
He hauled hay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we hired him to haul this furniture up from Paso Robles. But on the way, he broke down. And he had to have Tink DeBose come and rescue him. And with a flatbed, they put the truck on top of the flatbed and brought it up. And David said, well, you know, you went to so much trouble, I'm going to have to pay you more. And he goes, no, a deal's a deal. So he was very honorable in that way. So then we made lily shades and lily lamps, and we did that in conjunction with Bob Totosian and his partner from Buffalo Metals. And we also found a guy up in Paradise, Bill Ward, who made stained glass. And we, you could use your pointer. We would go visit him, and his house was
stained glass lamp.
was just full of antiques, and we loved to go there. But we asked him to make the lamp using the top, which we had blown. So he incorporated the blown lampshade onto the stained glass lampshade. And we made other lampshades. And this was in the showroom at that time, our group. We loved dressing up and taking photos. And this is one of the later photos out in front of the shop on Park Avenue. We had women working in the hot shop, which was not too common. This was Roberta Eichenberg. And this is Shawn Messenger. And Shawn is still a glass blower today. She lives in Toledo. And this is John DeWitt. And this is one of his paperweights. And Gary Jones. You can see all those rods of glass laying there. Those are what they would use for decorating the paperweights. And this is how they made that. Well, we would pull the glass the length of the studio, and then pick it up in this V-shaped board and cut it to length. Bruce, do you remember the name of that guy? So these are some of the little millefioris sitting on a hot plate ready to be put onto the paperweights. And this is what close packing of a paperweight looks like. You can see some of the larger millefiori cane in the back. And you would put all of those on a form and put the hot glass on top and pick them all up at once onto the paperweight. That's what they would look like. And these are by Greg Held. And he also passed away. And this is one of my favorites. This was Bruce's design, and it's the millefioris are the grass background and latticino wings and millefiori flowers. And this is in the Corning Museum of Glass. And this is one we called a Mabry, and another type of millefiori with latticino canes. And this one is all faceted. This one was done by Greg Held, and we had two employees, Marion and Sam, and they did some faceting for us. And we had a system where the guys could work on their own time after hours, and they could make pieces, and on Saturdays. And so then we would have their names signed on the piece as well, and they could sell them, or we could sell them in the store. Just some examples of
Evolving away from iridescence.
we were kind of reverting back to our roots of making glass that wasn't iridescent, but this was cased, so it was layered, and it had it was much heavier and thicker than the earlier pieces. And the Jack in the Pulpit. And so this is a selection of the pieces. There's a second from the left is a crackle glass. And then some other boxes with different designs. The one that's tipped up in the square box has the this little lady on top. Another selection, there's a dragonfly, and we experimented with sandblasting the glass to make like a pseudo cameo glass. That's with the hummingbird. And the crew, once more. Yeah, getting bigger. It had to be pretty early because Dan Boone's in there and Dion around 76, 77. And these are, when we would go to craft fairs, downtown we met this guy, Dan Shura, and he was doing scrimshaw on like bone, and we thought, wow, that technique could be used on the iridescent glass because you'd have ability to cut away the surface and have a contrast. And so we gave him some glass and told him to try it. And weeks went by and nothing. So we contacted him. He was afraid to touch it. You know, he didn't want to hurt the glass. So we said, no, we have lots of glass, just do it, you know. So he eventually got really good at it. And he made some jewelry as well. And then we went to Corning again, and we met this engraver from Steuben, and his name was Lubemeyer Richter. And we asked him if he would be interested in engraving on our glass. And so this is Lubo on the right, and he's showing me how to engrave with copper wheels. And these are the things that he made. And eventually he also worked for Lundberg Glass. We shared a lot of things back and forth. We went to school with Jim Lundberg, and he also met a sad demise, riding his bike along Highway 1 and a car hit him. So then we got approached by the Metropolitan Museum of Glass. We had glass for sale in their gift shop, and they wanted to build the front of Tiffany's Laurelton Hall in the museum. And they needed the tiles because the whole front of it was tiled. And so they approached us because they thought our glass was good enough quality to replace some of the tiles that they needed.
We're at a gift shop.
Yeah, I said that.
Okay.
And so David went back east again and found this tool which is called a side lever press. And that's what you can use to press glass, and we use that to make the tiles. And they saw the first tiles we made, and they said, well, we should just have you make all the tiles, because you know, then they'll all look consistent and they'll all be beautiful. And so they installed all the tiles, and they don't tell anybody that they're not Tiffany. And we don't care. But David magnanimously told them he'd do it for free. So they just paid for materials. So that's the whole front of Laurelton Hall where the tiles are in the Metropolitan Museum. And this is the studio much later when they moved into the R.C. Cola building next door to our original studio, which was the Byrite Steel Company. And this is when we had a memorial for Jeff Howell. And so it brought a lot of us together. So it was an opportunity to take a group photo. So that's those that remain, and David would like to say a few words.
Good morning. Where are you going?
I'm getting this mic off.
Okay. Good morning, Chico. Thank you for supporting us for well over 50 years. And I couldn't believe it. When Shari and I left the business in the early 80s and Doug took over, and when in Doug's will he gave the company to Bruce and Rhonda, I think that Doug and I didn't get along all the time. And I thought it was the most wonderful thing, that man. I mean, I forgave him for everything of any conflict we ever had. And so Orient Flume is still in business, and they have a lot of wonderful pieces. And I just wanted to thank the community, because we sold nationally, but we sold a lot of pieces locally. I want to express the fact that we were really young. I was born in '46, Shari was born in '49, and we set off on this journey when we were in our, well, me mid-20s, Shari younger than that. And what I want to reflect on is our optimism and how less complicated starting a business and doing business was back then. And we were really rebellious because the Vietnam War was going on, and it didn't end until '73, basically. It started in '63. We didn't know we couldn't do it. And we didn't know what we were doing. And what I'd like to compare it with is like early flight. We went to the Curtiss Air Museum in New York. He didn't know what he was doing. And I mean, he made bicycles, and then he moved into gliders and was a competitor with the Wrights. And so what I want to say is that we were lucky. We were really lucky. We were lucky in many ways. The first luck was having the talented people who walked in the door and wanted to work at Orient Flume. John DeWitt was a graduate, well, from Chico State. And he'd come there and I would chase him out the back door with a blowpipe with hot glass on it. I said, I'd rather have a grave digger than a graduate from a university glass blowing program, because a grave digger knows how to work and I can teach him how to blow glass, but a person who doesn't know how to work, what am I going to do with him? So I want to thank the people. A company is nothing other than the people who are there. I have a company now, Paradise Pictures, and I appreciate every one of them. And so times were different then, and we were very fortunate when we entered. We didn't know what we were doing. The studio glass movement was new. So thank you for being patient and hearing our story. You have any questions?
Where do you get your raw materials?
Where did we get our raw materials? Various places. We bought the highest quality sand we could. We bought soda ash, potash, lithium, which was, what, $3-4 a pound then, and now Bruce can say, I don't know, and more, like $90 a pound. There were suppliers of those materials, zinc and what was quite interesting, when I was at the Corning library and copying those formulas down, then I brought them back, and they were high lead, 45% lead. And so you need a really, there's nothing sweeter than high lead glass. I mean, glass has so many characteristics you can do. You know, it's short if you're mold blowing, it's long if you're doing this. But anyhow, we brought the formulas back, and thank God we were so bullheaded and determined. We struggled and struggled. We bought a covered pot and we built a furnace, and it cracked. And I will give great credit to Doug for reformulating the formula. And he replaced the lead with other materials, barium and lithium. And so you introduce silver nitrate into that batch, and you try to keep it in suspension. So that's one part of iridescent glass. Then when you make an article, you spray it with a tin chloride. And Bruce, his family lived back east. And so he had made a little piece like this, like maybe a cabinet piece. And he was visiting his folks, and they went to Corning, and
Rockwell.
Bob
Rockwell.
Yeah, Bob Rockwell. Had a furniture store and a big collection of Steuben. And so Bruce went into the store and showed Bob Rockwell this little piece, and he attributed it to Steuben. And so I remember Bruce calling, this is my story, Bruce called and he says, we've got it. You know, here's the deal. We were making pieces like that, selling it for $25. And as soon as we made the iridescent glass, we could sell it for $75 or $100. And there was a period of appreciation of Art Nouveau then. So you know, when you live this subject, it could go on and on and on. Hi.
I think you may have answered this, but did you have any doubts along the way, like, gosh, we can't do this?
No, never. I've never doubted anything.
What would you have done if it hadn't worked out? And as an artist, would you just have to do it?
I'd have been successful at something else.
Would you think about it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of surprised to see nobody is wearing protective clothing of any kind. Kind of
Why would we need to?
Well, the glass has 5,000-year history, and along the way, you learn what you can do, you should do, and you shouldn't do, and so it was never necessary to be protective clothing.
Plus, we got learning how to heal from our burns.
Aloe vera.
He said, you know, you could learn to heal from your burns. But we also, like, if you were putting the glass away in the annealing oven, wore gloves. What were they called, those gloves?
Kevlar.
Yeah.
Yes, lady.
Gloves.
And they wore sleeves. They wore sleeves on their arms.
Listen.
Before you actually, where did the drive come from to go into glass? Did you,
Oh,
child?
here's as short a history as I can give you. Don't pull that card out. After World War II, we had blown the hell out of the rest of the world, and the United States was the top dog. And there was the GI Bill, and the GI Bill allowed a lot of people to go to schools, colleges, universities, and a lot of money was put in there. And our economy was thriving. And people did crafts like woodworking, weaving, ceramics. And then in 61, 62, Harvey Littleton built there's a lot of controversy. This is very expansive, but let's just say in 62, the studio glass movement. And it was brought about to different places by ceramics instructors. What was her question?
What was the drive for you?
Oh, for me, ceramics has a background of knowledge of techniques and doing it big, doing it small, doing it pretty, doing it massive. And I looked at glass and I said, oh, I can think of a lot of things that had never been done with glass. Well, that's a 22-year-old view of the world. But it is optimistic. And so a lot of my interest is I wanted to know everything about glass and how to do everything with it. And for maybe 30 years, I ate, slept, breathed glass. And I got infected. Anybody else?
I'm just curious a little bit about production. Seeing some of the pictures and the paperweights lined up and all, how many paperweights would you make in a day's time?
If I had to go back and do Orient Flume over again, I would not be such a hard ass. If we went to work at 7 o'clock, I wanted everybody there at 6:45 on their time, setting up. Everybody, we did not, while I was there, we did not miss one day of work. And this is unusual. We always, the glass could be very bad, but we would figure out something to do with it. The one memory that I have of the day that we didn't work was I said, if Nixon resigns, the next day we're going to go to Butte Creek we're going to have a party. The food and the beer is on us. I'm trying to read Scott and Bruce's expression. No, I come from a farming background where work is not a bad word, you know. Trying to find pleasure is difficult. Working is not difficult. You can find work where you should be able to. So, hi.
So a couple of things. Number one, it appears that much of your equipment was kind of self-constructed,
Yes.
Self-designed and constructed.
Yes.
And then the innovation that you showed, it looks to me like you and your crew were not afraid to experiment.
Yeah.
And I think that's a driver. The last thing is that, have you ever constructed like a family tree of the artists that you began with and that they went off on their own?
No, I don't have that ego. I don't need that background.
David, we're actually trying to compile a history of California glass, and we're developing a spreadsheet to send to everybody we can still find to get all their information. And I've been working on a West Coast glass survey also. Before the history's gone and everybody's, you know.
Yeah, history is a strange animal. You know, it's like that old story of the elephant, you know. You feel the trunk and that's an elephant. You feel the tail, that's an elephant. You feel... There were approximately 12 dynamic studios growing spontaneously in California. And we were competitive, but we were friendly. And one thing about Bazzini going to Lundberg, Jim, he made such good glass. His formulation of his glass just blew me away. I really admired it. He was a good competitor. And what he did is he went to Guadalajara and hired a family of glass blowers and brought them up who had a tradition of blowing glass. So they could make beautiful shapes and beautiful glass. Okay, so Jim calls me up and he says, Bazzini showed me this idea of this plate, engraving this plate and to make earthweights. I mean, this is a competitor, a really good, honest competitor. And he says, I just wanted to tell you, I'm using that technique to make these earthweights. And I said, well, that's really admirable of you, Jim. You know, thanks, great. It's a technique, use it. So then Chris left Lundberg and came up and showed us the torch technique. So ring, 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 I got to call Jim and say, hey, Jim, thanks for that torching technique. That was really great. So, you know, you can win without being angry or childish or underhanded.
You will lose if you do that.
Yeah. So, folks, hey, Pam.
I just want to say that everybody knows that there's two sides of the brain. The right side, the creative side, and the left side, more objective, more business-oriented. And you're one of the artists, very few, that I know that have equally a right brain and a left brain. And I think that was so helpful in your business to make it what it is. It continues to be.
That's really true. Thanks, Pam. Good observation.
I have a brain, thank you. I'll tell you how naive I was. I started the glass, a commercial glass, so I could make my art. I was pretty successful young with the sculptures that I made and having shows and selling them. But so when Doug and I started out, I thought, well, I'll have the finances to explore in my sculpture. I could never divide my brain. It was either business, And Shari would say, oh, you have the weekend, why don't you go in and create something, you know? It's like having sex. You don't just turn it on like that, do you? I don't know, that's maybe for this old group, the wrong analogy.
Any other questions? I just wanted to
I just have an observation.
Okay.
You know,
Repeat it.
I've been friends with ORIENT FLUME since pretty much the beginning. And I was lacking in talent.
Michael Ahrens.
I'm a writer. I can do that really well. But I have no artistic talent whatsoever. But I see the talent, I notice. And I've watched ORIENT FLUME grow from where none of us had any money. We were struggling, all of us, to make a living, to a successful business that manifested itself worldwide. It's just amazing to me to watch that art talent grow. And I thank them for being my friends.
Thank you for being a supporter.
You've mentioned a lot of places that have